All right, welcome team. My name is Simon Handler. I am going to be your timekeeper and here to answer any questions you might have throughout the presentation. Just as a reminder, no presentation aids such as PowerPoints, handouts, posters are permitted. You may not use any electronic devices aside from the laptop for video streaming. Teams are encouraged to use written or printed notes. And if at any point throughout the round you experience technical difficulties and fall off the line, just stay calm and refer to the Zoom link in the invitation. There are a few slight tweaks to this final round format. We're going to start off with a 10-minute presentation off the bat. We're going to roll right into 10 minutes of Q&A from the judges, and then 10 minutes of feedback from the judges after that. And just to keep the time, I'm going to be holding up these nice little cards that I made with the time remaining, and I'll also drop it in the chat just in case you miss me. And if you are still talking when the time is up, I'm going to have to cut you off after you finish your sentence, just to keep things moving and on track. But again, congratulations, team, on making it to the final round. And without further ado, let us begin.
All right. Good afternoon, members of the NSC. My name is Sabrina Otnes. I am here with my colleagues, Ms. Danielle Murad, Mr. Louis Jarvers, and Mr. Eli Clemens to brief you on the recent development of ransomware attacks targeting the maritime shipping industry and the rerouting of U.S. military supplies to terror group Hezbollah. The incident amounts to a severe national cyber incident level threatening the economic sector and posing national security threats to the United States and in the Middle East. To mitigate these threats, we recommend 5 policy measures centered around the economic and financial, geopolitical, and security risks of heightened concern. The Baskerville ransomware attack, originally affecting 7 ports in the US and international ports across 6 continents, stalling international trade, in particular oil trade, has now escalated to what we see as a supply chain crisis, potentially threatening US security and the port of Beirut. After the Baskerville ransomware kit was leaked in April, we believe additional malicious cyber groups, specifically Eastern European Cybercrime Group and Hezbollah operatives, obtained and utilized the capability to capitalize on the growing instability around the world with a potential aim to take advantage of the chaos caused by the ransomware attacks and obtain rerouted and misplaced weapons. The widening scope of the ransomware attacks, broader disruption of maritime transportation systems, and now disruption to energy flows through the region pose a significant national security risk to the US. Of particular concern at this time is the missing and rerouted US military materials. We have intelligence from the CIA that Hezbollah has been developing bombing and missile capabilities since 2019. I will now pass this off to Mr. Jarvers to provide you with our assessment of the situation.
Thank you, Ms. Otnes. Based on the facts available at this time, we assess with high confidence that the Romanian cybercrime group 1881 Collective initially affected ports with Baskerville ransomware and is now distributed by other groups after the leak of the malware kit. We also have high confidence that the ongoing ransomware attacks are financially motivated and conducted by Eastern European cybercrime groups via short-selling stocks of companies before hitting them with a ransomware attack. With high confidence, we also assess that Iran is taking advantage of mislocated US shipments, in particular with regards to medical and COVID-19 supplies. We are highly confident that Hezbollah will take advantage of the rerouted surface-to-air missiles for terrorist or nefarious purposes. We are of medium confidence that the missing military supplies have been rerouted to Hezbollah by its Iranian supporters, possibly by exploiting the ongoing supply chain attack against the port management software Tidal Waves. With medium confidence, we equally assess that the ransomware and the supply chain attacks were initially coordinated. After the leak of the malware kit, we expect Iran to take continued advantage of the unclear situation via its Tidal Wave supply chain attack. We have collaborated with CISA on identifying the level of severity to which the current incidents have reached. Based on the attack's functional and potential impact, observed activity, actor characterization, cross-sector dependency, and potential impact, the national cyber incident is severe on the cyber incident severity scheme. A severe priority incident is likely to result in a significant impact to public health or severity, national security, economic security, foreign relations, and/or civil liberties. We are happy to discuss the reasoning behind this analysis in more detail in the Q&A section. The current situation is highly dynamic and it evolves as we speak. Our assessment is based on a high level of uncertainty. This is why we want to sensitize the NSC that all immediate and future policy recommendations require high flexibility on all sides. The following recommendations are split into an immediate action that we recommend the NSC to take right away, as well as future actions that should be taken if the situation further deteriorates or the individual trigger is qualified. My colleagues, Ms. Murad and Mr. Clemens, will take you through our immediate and future now.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvers. Based on our assessment, we have developed policy options along 5 objectives. First, we recommend the NSC to focus on corroborating intelligence and establishing crisis coordination. For immediate action, we recommend that the temporary interagency working group Portside that we established at our last meeting with the involvement of CISA's NCIC, FBI Cywatch, the Coast Guard's National Response, ODNI, relevant Coast Guard captains of the port and port operators, as well as the MTS ISAC, continue to coordinate responses across these agencies, establish an international maritime crisis response center with ENISA, the International Maritime Organization's international ship and port facility security, and partnering international shipping and port companies to continue to develop and respond to the ongoing situation. We also ask that Portside increase information sharing with private sector, including port and shipment operators and private security companies through the ISACs, in order to also track the missing cargo and ships, as well as the supply whereabouts. We want to emphasize the importance of the ODNI's lead role on intelligence activities, coordinating with both the U.S. intelligence community as well as Five Eye and other international partners, specifically on any changes on the cyber or physical security and any indicators of potential terrorist activity beginning to unfold. We advise the Department of Justice and the FBI to continue to investigate the actions of Eastern European cyber groups to potentially follow with an indictment later on as things unfold. Given the impact of the supply chain, we would recommend the National Security Council to convene a principals committee meeting to ensure presidential level authorization if necessary. Our second objectives are for the NSC to ensure the national and the cybersecurity. For immediate action, we recommend that there's CISA US coordination with the affected ports and shipping operators and issuing a national cyber awareness system alert to patch systems and for identified vulnerabilities on ports and ships as they become available. The temporary working group Portside should also secure physical defenses in ports and run any outstanding updates on systems. We would ask the DoD and the Department of Homeland Security to also determine the potential threat of the missing military materials and plan for military embarkations at non-affected ports in the US or in allied ports. We would also recommend the NSC to authorize the naval cooperation and guidance for shipping assistance in monitoring and communicating with merchant ships, and to work with the International Maritime Security Construct to monitor the Middle East maritime security of the global supply routes. Finally, we call on the CENTCOM, EUCOM, and coordinate with US allies, including Israel, for help in rerouting the US military supplies that were identified in the port of Beirut. Given the presence of this sensitive equipment and the intelligence that Hezbollah may be trying to get access to this, we very much want to move the things from this location. I will now hand it over to Eli.
Thank you. Our third recommendation focuses on mitigating economic and financial threats to the U.S. For immediate action, we advise that the NSC request the U.S. Coast Guard in cooperation with port authorities and shipping companies to prioritize shipments of high national interest. The NSC should also address U.S. Coast Guard, DHS, and CISA to track and quarantine ships from malware-infected ports and free malware-infected ships in the order of national priority. We advise the NSC to have the Federal Reserve Board, the Treasury Department, and the SEC to explore monetary and fiscal policy options to counter potential supply shocks and stock market crises due to the short sale of industrial stocks. For future options, we advise the NSC to request US Cybercom and FBI to disrupt ransomware issuing cybercrime groups that issue ransomware in Eastern Europe. Our fourth recommendation is for the NSC to ensure US geopolitical influence is maintained, in particular with regards to the missing US military weapons. Immediately, the NSC should advise DOS to address EU and NATO for cooperation on further investigation disruption of cybercrime groups linked to dormant hound malware. Should also advise the DOS to request UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs to reduce potential regional tensions resulting from the ongoing supply chain attack, and instruct the United States Naval Forces Europe, Africa to deploy resources for at-sea maritime exercises, specifically focus on recovery and tracking of missing US military arms. Our fifth and final recommendation is that the NSC establishes an effective crisis management. As immediate action, the NSC should issue a public statement acknowledging the ongoing situation and use traditional and social media and also leverage state, local, and tribal governments to issue policy updates on a periodic basis. NSC should also work with the National Cyber Director to ensure that social media and other tech sector peer companies engage with law enforcement, civil society, and traditional news media platforms for trust. Ladies and gentlemen, the intelligence we have received on adversaries' missions to collect critical US military equipment, as well as the ongoing ransomware-driven service attack on global supply chains, pose a severe threat to US national security and economic interests. This is a cascading crisis. Our recommendations focus on strong coordination with a temporary interagency working group, improving the intelligence of this highly dynamic situation, and mitigating national security and the economy while balancing for escalation. Thank you very much, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, team. Nice presentation. We're going to roll directly into Q&A from the judges starting now.
So Lily, I don't think you've gotten to go first.
I'm happy to. Thank you so much, Wendy. First of all, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. And you have outlined a broad range of options for consideration. I'm curious on that last bit about state, local, tribal government alerts. How does that fit into the overall strategy, and how did that make it into your recommendation given the sort of broad litany of what you went over in terms of mitigations? How does tribal government relate to the other range of options that you were talking about?
Yeah, I can take this, Leila. So we were really hoping to focus on crisis communication, because what we saw with the COVID-19 crisis is that we really need collaboration across all levels of government, even down to tribal, to ensure that there's no panicking. And with 60% of the world's merchant ships impacted and concerning reports coming out about missing military arms, we thought that it was essential that all levels of government are effectively communicating with the crisis, and that there is a high level of trust amidst potential misinformation, disinformation campaigns. Thank you.
Okay, related to the sort of communication and collaboration point, you also raised the private sector and engaging with them via ISACs as a recommendation. So what is the primary goal, and what would be the message that you would seek to parlay through that level of engagement?
We would particularly want to engage private sector companies, especially the large shipping companies and ports, because these are operated by the private sector, to work with them to assess what is the extent of the missing goods, what has been compromised, and then sort of begin to fit all of the pieces together and try and assess where there might be potential supplies shortages in the supply chain, where there needs to be higher levels of remediation and fixing of the systems, and things of the sort. Since it's such a big situation, and as was mentioned by my colleague, 60% of shipping has stopped, we do need those private companies that are in charge of that shipping to be able to come together and exchange that information, both in terms of the amount of goods and also the indicators that they're seeing within their systems, and how the malware is potentially spreading in their activities.
All right, my final question relates to the comments regarding ODNI as serving the sort of primary coordination function. There have been some hiccups with that in the past. So what precisely do you envision ODNI's role here, and what exactly would they be executing, and how, given the specific threat scenario that we're discussing?
Okay, well, given the focal point that, again, is so spread out and there's so many different components, both the physical part in terms of the presence of terrorist organizations, as well as the cyber intelligence, we think that the ODNI is a good place for all of these different agencies and then international partners to come together in a mid ground and share that main intelligence to have a full operational picture and be able to make those decisions. So we want that to be the main place in which the information is processed by all of these different actors and then plug it into our task force port side in order for that information to feed into all of the operations we're carrying out.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, I think I'll step in. Thanks very much for the presentation. Let me see. You covered a lot of areas, and as far as coordination, you threw a lot of names at me really fast that I didn't have time to write down. So I think I will let my colleague John handle that part. One thing that I might have missed is that depending on how you read the inject and where you place the comma, either 30,000 ships or 300,000 ships are missing and unaccounted for and unreachable. And those aren't just shipping containers. There are people on those ships, and we don't know whether they're dead in the water, whether they're starving. What specific policy recommendations did you have for search and rescue for not just U.S. ships, but presumably this is hitting ships of all nationalities around the globe?
I'm happy to take that one. I think looking at our temporary working group, we assembled basically actors from two sides, focusing on the Department of Homeland Security as well as the Coast Guard, who's heavily involved in all aspects of securing ports and transportation. We have though understood that over sort of the development of these events that we require heavily on private sector support in localizing and securing ships. So we will we seek to secure the missing ships by first finding them with leveraging private sector support in identifying ships and the whereabouts of the ships, reporting the condition, focalizing or centralizing the communication and information sharing throughout our temporary working group, and then deploying Coast Guard as far as possible with help of Navy resources to respond to most pressing emergencies as soon as possible.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you mention Navy resources, because also, as far as the port and the Coast Guard are concerned, they won't know of a ship until it actually makes it to port. And if it doesn't, it's out in the deep ocean, how are you going to find it? And how are you going to coordinate with all of the other countries that are looking for their ships as well? Okay, thank you very much. Passing it over to John.
One quick addition, oh, sorry, if I may. I think what is key here is that we see our temporary interagency working group cooperating with an international maritime crisis response center that we coordinate between European partners as well as the International Maritime Organization and International Ship and Port and Facility Security, making sure that we include international shipping and port companies to identify ships that are somewhere out in the open sea and not in national territories.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. So fairly comprehensive. Quick question: how a lot of people are doing a lot of different things. How are you guys paying for this? How are you dealing with a budgetary shortfall from an emergency perspective that could not have been accounted for?
Yeah, so first off, we want to access, FEMA has a port security grant program for emergency funds to protect both the port security and to maintain or reestablish maritime mitigation security protocols. So first off, in the ports, we would like to access that for fiscal year 2021. There is $100 million available there. So we believe this is a great source of income to finance these very specific things. We are aware of the long-term economic implications of the unfolding situation, given the stalling in trade that will happen. But in terms of for port security, I think at this time, that would be one of the first areas that we tap into. But I'm sure my colleagues can also add to that.
Yeah, just on the economic side, this is why we're sort of giving the heads up to the Federal Reserve Board, the Treasury Department, SEC to work on some quick emergency mitigation monetary and fiscal options. One thing that we didn't really have time to mention is that we would explore the potential pushing through a bill similar to the COVID crisis bill or the 2008 financial crisis through Congress. But since this is a bit more of a time-consuming, political capital-consuming process, we thought it was not necessary for this quick briefing. Thank you.
Okay. What role do you guys see? I heard a lot of things. I heard, Coast Guard, CISA, FBI, ODNI. What role do you see for the U.S. military domestically? And I'm including the National Guard.
Yeah, so one of the roles we see deploying the National Guard under Title 10 authorities. We do it under Title 10 rather than 32 because we recognize that there is currently disruptions in ports all across the US, so we wouldn't want to do it on the state level, but rather have a federal control of the National Guard in order to especially ensure physical security of the ports, since we have intelligence that there is a potential planning by Hezbollah for specific attacks or other terrorist organizations. We believe that the National Guard can both provide help in securing the ports physically, but also helping in the mitigation in the cyber component as well.
Okay, I got no further questions. Thanks.
We have 8 seconds left, so
Okay, we'll yield the balance.
I think that's going to do it. Thank you guys very much. We are going to now just transition right into 10 minutes of feedback from our esteemed panel of judges. Judges, would you mind introducing yourselves for the team, please?
Awesome. Nice job, all. I'm Treher. I run the Cyber Statecraft Initiative. Two things jumped out to me. One is, as I think was commented on by a number of judges during the comment period, you're throwing a lot of suggestions at us, a lot of recommendations, which is fair given the breadth of the crisis, but is difficult to process. And so as you're thinking about framing this kind of conversation, one thing that would be really helpful to lead with up front and then hit again at the end is, what is your desired end state? What's your vision for where this thing lands? So if we put these recommendations into practice, what are we going to see at the end of the rainbow? And why is that the scenario that we want to accomplish? You could very well come back and tell us we need to accept the fact and account for the fact there's going to be substantially curtailed maritime commerce for a great deal of time. And we need to plan around that, and here are our recommendations for you. You could come back and tell us that's priority number one, and we're just going to accept the other forms of risk that have come up. And that's the story that we need to be thinking about. So that would be helpful, I think, in framing and give you space for us to slot these ideas into some sort of order or some framework. The other piece, and I think to John's point is a good one, as you're thinking about the response, understandable and reasonable that you're not moving quickly to military action, but it would be useful to understand where those entities play a role and how you're being restrained, again, in service of your vision, helps us understand, okay, this group is evaluated as an option, they put it down and they have a reason for that, or they put it in this particular place. I think that's especially as we're getting into the later stages of the scenario, it's as important as we're trying to think about what you're telling us to do, to see the configuration that you're trying to play with, that you're presenting, as much as the individual actions and lists that you want us to actually take action on or move out on. And so as you're thinking about this kind of briefing in future, A, having a very clear vision up front, but also B, giving us a sense of the skeleton and the bones, right? Not just how you're ordering these things, but also why they sit where they do in relation to each other. That'll quickly help us understand more of your thinking, expose some of your assumptions, and help communicate what your intent, overall intent actually looks like. But thank you very much. Good passing off between you guys. It was good to see. And thanks for coming up.
So I'm John, worked at CISA, Commerce, Cybercom and NSA a while back. So you guys, there is a distinction between economic relief and the budgetary constraints of the US government. It's important in responding to the question, you make that distinction. I would have liked to hear in your brief, though, that you were going to Congress and asking for an economic relief bill or an infusion of funds. For DHS grant programming, I'd have to look into it, but I'm not entirely sure you can use a grant program on an emergency basis like you're suggesting, but I'll defer to you on that. I'm surprised by the scale of this, that there wasn't any consideration of declaring a national emergency and utilizing the domestic relief fund, having FEMA emergency funds. The use of DoD Title X authorities domestically, I'm not entirely sure about that. You could just as easily go defense support to civil authorities operating under CISA, and it would get you to where you want to go. I got to tell you, one thing that you want to do is, I understand this sort of the port side group that you're setting up in the International Maritime Group collaboration. It's important, I think, to get to an appropriate level of detail responding to some of the problems that are presented. You can't, and I'm not suggesting you did, you can't hand wave away by saying, hey, that group will take care of that. A good example of this is the missing 30,000 ships. We didn't really, that's one policy area or policy problem I don't feel like you guys adequately answered. I wanted to hear a little bit more behind that. Otherwise, I think it was pretty well structured. I think you guys have a clear mastery of roles and responsibilities of the federal government. I mean, a clear mastery of that. You're clearly thinking about the economic issue in a very fulsome way. Bringing in the Fed and other economic tools in the SEC, I think was a pretty shrewd move. But some of these issues, I think you guys could have hit it a little bit harder.
Hello again. I'm Salila. I'm the cybersecurity policy lead at Facebook, and was previously for a long time an attorney in the public sector working at the Department of Justice and also the Senate Judiciary Committee. I think you did a very good job in terms of laying the stage for considerations and what we needed to focus on. You talked about confidence levels, which I thought was very helpful. You talked about CISA collaboration, which is sort of recognizing a primary subject matter expert. You also, showcased familiarity with terminology and expertise, talking about the National Cyber Incident Response Framework, etc. So that was, I think, really good to sort of come up front and sort of present the signal that you were well informed, and I think that's always a good thing. This is feedback that I've provided elsewhere to other teams in prior iterations and current iterations, etc. There was a whole heck of a lot that you proposed in terms of what could be done. And at the end of it, with a sort of tribal government recommendation and communicating, it was like, this is the NSC, right? This is not state and local government. This is federal level response, and state, local, tribal is critically important. I do not mean to undercut that in any way, but you're trying to hit the most effective, the most bang for your buck response, mitigation, etc. with this. And so at the end of it felt like they're just trying to showcase how much they can corral within potential responses. And so you could handle something like that in a real world scenario with in addition to the top 3 or top 5 and no more than 5 recommendations, we also have an annex memorandum that we will submit pursuant to this briefing, where we outline other approaches that could be suitable for further communicating, right? I mean, that's how you can sort of communicate that expertise without having the kitchen sink included. ODNI, right? ODNI is an interesting beast, right? Because they exist and they've existed for some time, but what is the true efficacy of ODNI in some of the proposals that you are actually recommending? What's their track record for success? What's the level of trust within the interagency for ODNI to carry the baton on execution? So those are sort of realistic considerations in some of these otherwise technically accurate proposals. And that sort of interweaving between what is technically accurate and technically comprehensive, but then on the other hand, feasible. And John raised the point about sort of fiscal reasonableness, and Danielle came back with, well, here's the budget. You give the budget. Well, what's the breakdown of that $100 million? How much of that is already allocated for other purposes? So overall, very good structure, very good command of subject matter expertise. You have a famed coach who's well known to many, so that's wonderful. But you know, you just sometimes less is more, and being very realistic about what is feasible, I think, is an execution strategy that can be very helpful. But all in all, congratulations for making it to this round, and it was great to hear your presentation.
All right. Hi, I'm Wendy Nather, was formerly a CISO in the public and private sectors. I was an industry analyst, and I also helped to stand up the retail ISAC before coming to Duo Security, which is now part of Cisco. Great presentation. I feel like you hit a lot of really good notes that I was looking for, like, thank you for saying you were going to call on Israel. I'm sure they will appreciate it. You know, you touched on fiscal options. You were very coordination heavy in your suggestions, which was also really good. Just bear in mind that whenever you suggest that coordination is going to happen among a lot of groups, somebody's going to have the ball, because otherwise it'll just be squabbling about who has the ball. And so it would be good to have an idea in mind as to who's going to lead that coordination, not just that it happens. And then finally, and this is a problem that I see across the board with these sort of scenarios, is that there's very little appreciation of the problems that remediation poses for an attack like this, that it's not going to be just a matter of patching. You know, you pull into port, Coast Guard patches you, you're good to go, you leave again. It usually means completely rebuilding, in some cases, the infrastructure that shipping companies have been using for decades, have no money to replace, and simply deciding what needs to be done and getting it done could take literally months or years until they're protected against this sort of threat. So this is just something that I think everybody kind of falls down on when they're thinking about long-term policy options. But it is a really, really important one, especially since you're dealing with the private sector shipping companies. That's pretty much all I got. Thank you very much, and good luck to you.
There's the unmute. All right, thanks guys. That does it for the feedback round. At this point, we're going to give the judges a few minutes to score you guys and kick you out. So congratulations again on making the final round, and wishing you guys the best of luck.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, judges.